The Velhari forest on Sereth Prime did not have a night cycle so much as it had a dimming. The twin moons filtered the darkness into something amber and layered, and the trees, which were old enough to have names in 3 dead languages, held the light in their canopies like cupped hands. It was beautiful. It was also, as Princess Ethan of the Sereth royal line was currently discovering, extremely dangerous. She had found the boy 4 years ago. That was how she thought of it. Even though the timeline was more complicated, the refugee transport, the border station, the processing queue that had lasted 6 weeks, while bureaucrats argued about whether a human child without documentation constituted a person or a logistical problem. She had been passing through on a diplomatic tour. She had heard him through a wall. Not crying. That was what stopped her. He was 7 years old, alone in a processing cell, and he was not crying. He was sitting in the corner with his knees pulled up, and he was counting, quietly, methodically, in a language she didn't speak. And something about the counting, the sheer determined practicality of it, had reached through the wall and the diplomatic protocol and the 18 layers of reason why this was not her problem, and seized her by some part of herself she hadn't known was reachable. His name, she learned later, was Eli. He had been on the transport because someone had put him on it. Who that someone was, and where they had gone, the records did not say. She had cut through 4 levels of bureaucratic resistance, signed 17 forms, invoked a princess's right of sponsorship that hadn't been used in 200 years, and taken him home. Her court had been, collectively, appalled. A human, her advisor Serethvel had said, in the tone of someone describing an exotic disease. A child human, Your Highness, with no lineage, no status, no. He counts when he's frightened, Ethan had said. He counts because counting is the one thing he can control. I am keeping him. She had kept him. Eli was 11 now, and he was not the boy from the processing cell anymore. In the way that a river is not the rain that fed it, same material, entirely different thing. He had grown up in the palace, which meant he had grown up surrounded by Sereth nobility, which meant he had spent 4 years being looked at with the particular expression that Sereth nobility reserved for things they considered below consideration. He had learned their language in 7 months, which was 2 months faster than the tutors said was possible for a human brain. He had learned their customs, their history, their court protocols. He had also, in the hours he spent alone, which were many, because the palace was full of creatures who did not want to spend time with him, taught himself everything else. The palace library was old and poorly organized, and nobody paid much attention to what the human boy checked out. He had read military histories, hunting records, wilderness survival manuals for 6 different biospheres. He had found, in a dusty wing of the archive, a translated collection of texts from his own species' history, strategy, philosophy, accounts of human warfare across 20 centuries, and he had read them the way a starving person eats, without stopping, without looking up, past the point where it was comfortable. He had a gift, his tutors noted in their reports with some unease, for retention, for pattern recognition, for looking at a problem from the angle that hurt it most. He was also, which the reports mentioned more hesitantly, unnervingly calm for his age. The Velthari forest was not supposed to be on the evening's itinerary. It was supposed to be a diplomatic ride, a formal tour of the Sereth outer estates, Ethan on her ceremonial mount, Eli riding beside her on the smaller animal she'd gotten him 2 years ago, a small retinue of guards. Ceremonial. Safe. Dull. The guards had been called off at the last junction by a message that Ethan would later discover was forged. The Drevathi pack found them 40 minutes into the forest. The Drevathi were not native to Sereth Prime. They had been introduced, the histories said, by a noble house 3 centuries back that thought apex predators on the estate grounds were fashionable. The idea had not survived contact with ecology. The pack had flourished. They were roughly the size of horses, low-slung and armored along the spine, with jaws that could bisect a tree branch 6 inches thick. They hunted in coordinated groups with a level of tactical intelligence that had surprised every researcher who had studied them, and then stopped surprising the ones who hadn't escaped in time. There were 9 of them. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. Ethan's mount reared and threw her. She hit the forest floor hard, managed to roll, came up with her ceremonial blade already drawn. Useless against Drevathi armor, she knew, a gesture more than a weapon, but she was royal bred and royal trained, and she would meet it standing. She looked for Eli. He was already moving. She would try to reconstruct it afterward, and she would largely fail, because what Eli did in the next 6 minutes did not organize itself into a narrative the way events were supposed to. It was too fast and too deliberate and structured by a logic she could follow in retrospect but had not been able to track in real time. He had unslung the pack he always carried on rides. She never asked what was in it, had assumed it was the usual adolescent collection of snacks and books, and what came out of it was not what she expected. A short blade, climbing cord rated for weight 3 times his own. A canister of something she didn't recognize. 2 shaped metal pieces that assembled, in 4 seconds, into something with the geometry of a trap. He had been preparing for something like this. She understood, in a cold flash, that he had always been preparing for something like this. That the boy who spent his evenings quietly in the library had been spending them the way his species, somewhere deep in whatever coded knowledge lived in human bone, had always spent them, figuring out how to survive the thing that was coming. He threw the canister toward the flanking group of Drevithi, 3 animals, and whatever was in it interacted with their sensory organs in a way that made them veer, disoriented, 2 of them colliding with each other in the amber dark. He had the cord up in the same motion, strung between 2 trees at neck height for the lead animal of the central group. And when the lead animal charged, the cord caught it, and the fall was enormous and loud, and stopped the pack's momentum for exactly the 2 seconds he had calculated he needed. He used those 2 seconds to put the assembled trap in the path of the right flank animal. It triggered. Ethan stopped trying to track all of it because she couldn't, and instead she watched the thing her son. She had thought of him as her son for 2 years, she realized. She had simply not said it out loud. Was doing to 9 apex predators, alone, in a dark forest, with equipment he had assembled and carried because some part of him had looked at the world around him and decided, methodically and without drama, that he should be ready. He was not larger than the Drevithi. He was not faster. He was not armored. He was, however, the only creature in the forest who had thought about this specific problem before it arrived. The pack did not understand what was happening to them, which was itself a weapon he was using. They were predators wired for prey that fled or froze. Eli did neither. He moved through them like someone solving a spatial problem, placing himself where their coordination broke down, using their own mass and momentum as materials. When one isolated itself from the group, which they were doing, because the canister's effect was still disrupting their pack sense, he was already there, and he was thorough. He was 11 years old. He was also the product of a species that had been doing this, in forests remarkably similar to this one, for 300,000 years before it learned to write anything down. When it was over, the forest was quiet again. Eli came back to her through the amber dark, breathing hard, his jacket torn along one shoulder where a Drevithi had grazed him. He looked at the tear with the expression of someone noting an inconvenience. He looked at Ethan. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She was a princess of the Sereth royal line. She had been trained from birth to maintain composure in crisis. She was, at this moment, discovering the outer limit of that training. "No," she said. "Eli, we should move," he said. "The canister will wear off in about 15 minutes, and I only had the one." Eli. He looked at her. He had his father's eyes, she had sometimes thought, then remembered he had no father she knew of, that the eyes were just his, were just human, were just the particular dark and watchful quality she'd seen through a wall when he was counting. "You planned for this," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I planned for something," he said carefully. "I didn't know what. He paused, searching for the Sereth word, then gave up and used the human one. Prepared. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the thing she had been not saying for 2 years. "You are my son," she said. "Formally. In any record that matters. You are my son, and you will have my name, and I am sorry it took me this long to say it where you could hear it." Eli looked at her. His expression did something complicated that his face was too controlled, too palace-trained, to fully show. "Okay," he said, in a voice that was not as steady as he probably wanted it to be. "Then, we really should move." She moved. She walked beside him through the amber forest, and she thought about the boy she'd heard counting through a wall. Counting because counting was the one thing he could control, and she thought about what he had become, not despite the world's indifference to him, but through it, shaped by it into something extraordinary and quiet and utterly fundamentally unbreakable. The Drevathi pack did not follow them. In the forest behind them, everything was very still.